Talk with you.
Is it you?
Yeah. Hi everyone, and welcome to Guitar Talk. I'm Will Music. I just had my phone going in the background, and we were sitting there going, "Who's that? Is that you?" Welcome to everybody to Guitar Talk. Here on Guitar Talk, I'll be introducing you to internationally acclaimed and also nationally acclaimed musicians. We'll touch base on many facets of the music industry, covering booking agents, venues, studios, and their requirements. We'll talk about new gadgets and gear, which we'll be doing that tonight. We'll meet up with artisan craftsmen, masters in their craft. We'll hear of those horror stories and fun stories, and some of those what happens on the road stories that aren't supposed to be shared, but we'll get them out. We'll get them out on some of the shows. And something most passionate to me is promoting and nurturing the new and up and coming talent, the unseen, unknown future musicians of this country and hopefully the world. So we'll see them on the show as well. I guarantee you that we'll have a few laughs and we'll have lots of giggles, and we'll keep the journey organic and pretty lighthearted. So now to the show, and joining us tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we have the one and only Jeremy Alsop. Jeremy,
hi there.
Welcome.
Hello.
Welcome on deck.
Thank you.
Now, for those of you who don't know who Jeremy is, and look, it's okay if you don't, because after tonight, you're definitely going to know who Jeremy Alsop is. Jeremy is a bass player who's not only known here in Australia, but internationally. And Jeremy's basically set the benchmark for bass players all around the world, when you really think about it. He's played tonight. You'll hear some stories of some guys that he's worked with and so on. Jeremy, you've got so many guys that have actually learnt from you that are actually like industry leaders as well. But it's absolutely an honour to have you here tonight.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
So now to begin the journey of Jeremy Alsop, what were your influences?
Okay. When I first started hearing music, it was my mother playing the piano. And I remember in my family, my mother and my father loved music, and without prejudice. So like there'd be Tchaikovsky and there'd be Louis Armstrong and the Beatles, all at the same, all listened to with the same intensity, which was wonderful. And I remember as a young child, my mother played the piano very well, and she could read music very well. So to me, the concept of reading music was no different from a child asking someone to read to them from a book. I'd find there were some pieces of music that I actually really loved. One was the Children's Corner by Debussy, and I can always remember. It's a little bit politically incorrect now, but there was a wonderful piece that Debussy wrote called "The Gollywog's Cakewalk," which was to do with there was a international festival in Paris one year for Debussy, and they showcased African music and African art. And I think that was probably one of my first introductions to the possibilities of how influential jazz had been. So that was my first introduction to music, and I always remember from very young, I loved the Beatles. Not the music was wonderful, but also the important part that music played in culture and society. Because music was at that time changing the world.
Yeah, and like back in those days, how old were you when you first started like playing? Because you never really started playing bass originally, did you?
No. I started playing piano. My earliest recollection was actually, I think I was about 8 or 9 or something, and my parents had just taken us all to see the very controversial musical Hair, which is actually at a theatre which is now a nightclub in Burke Street in Melbourne, but it was on there, and I remember just picking out a tune from that show on piano, and then I kind of just enjoyed playing the piano. But then I used to love listening to the Beatles, and the instrument that caught my ear mostly was the bass.
Now, you also played the cello.
Yes.
How did you get onto that?
Oh, okay. Well, so I'd always been interested in playing music in all different settings, and I got into cello because it was year 11 and 12, junior and senior high school. I'd got into a music scholarship playing piano, and I had to take a second instrument. And at that stage, I was already playing electric bass. But of course, in those days, electric bass wasn't part of music education. So I had to learn a stringed instrument. So I chose the cello because I felt the cello was closer in musical ideas to melodic ideas on the electric bass.
So did you find the progression, like playing the cello, you're actually playing that stringed instrument, did you find the progression from playing cello to bass like an easy step?
Yeah.
It's just like stepping across, yes. And that was it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was actually going from bass to cello.
Okay.
Because I played the electric bass
yeah.
before. I can always remember really deciding I had to play electric bass because when I was in, it would have been year 9 or year 10, hearing a school band playing it in a lunchtime gig, right? Yeah. And they were the band was playing like a 12-bar blues, but for some reason the bass player hadn't heard about the 5 chord yet, so he just played the 1 and the 4, and that just blew my mind. I thought, how could anyone not play the 5 chord in a blues?
Yeah.
So in that moment I thought, well, the world needs some bass players. So that's why. But also, I just I guess intuitively feel that the bass was a profound and made a very, very strong contribution to all the music that it was involved in, and it appealed to my sense of forward motion in culture and society and everything like this. One reason why I love these NS and Ned Steinberg as well, because it's like always thinking of there must be a better way to do it. And I always thought that electric bass was one of those instruments that made music different.
Yeah.
And then going back historically, you can also tell that there's music before electric bass and music after electric bass. And even people like Quincy Jones readily say there's one instrument that changed music more than any other instrument in the history of music in a short time, and that's electric bass. Because without electric bass, we wouldn't have R&B, we wouldn't have Motown, we wouldn't have soul music, we definitely wouldn't have rock and roll, and we most definitely wouldn't have had Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
Because a loud distorted guitar without a strength of fundamental tone, which is from the electric bass, would not have made any sense at all. Because regardless, music is like architecture. You know, you need a strong foundation and a strong framework to hang everything on.
Yeah.
And with electric bass, it's great. You've got one instrument providing what before used to be a group of probably 10 or 12 double basses to make the same amount of sound as one electric bass.
Yeah.
But then when you've got 12 people playing in that register, there's a whole lot of
muddiness,
pitch and timing indiscretion, which makes it a bit blurred, which is then not a good foundation.
Yeah. So moving along from your school years and stuff, then you obviously got you got your license and all that sort of stuff. How did you find getting in the music scene was back then? In those days,
I was very, very, very lucky, and had a lot of really good people looking after me. My first what planted the seed really was there was a production of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat by an amateur theatre. And the musical director was a guy called Ian Hunt, and he took it upon himself to find the best young musicians and put them together. So there was Paul Grabowski, Willie Zigier, wonderful drummer John Curry, and myself, who were the core band. And from that, that opened up a whole lot of possibilities, because I remember going with Paul Grabowski. Paul Grabowski's elder brother was already established in the Melbourne studio scene as a bass player. He was about 15 years older than Paul. So he was. And
is Paul the same age as you, roughly?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
A year or so older.
Yep.
And then this musical director hooked me up with to have lessons, because I was pretty much self-taught, aside from learning piano and listening a lot to music, and fortunately having a good background of being able to understand the structure of music, reading and all of that sort of stuff. As you know, my background with my mother, like reading music was natural.
Yep.
As natural as speaking.
Yep.
You know. So then he hooked me up with a bass player who was doing all of the studio work and all of the TV shows. And in those days, there was like many families in Melbourne supported purely by instrumental performance. That was like a guy going, well, I play bass. No, I don't teach. I don't do anything. I don't do arrangements. I don't do anything else. I play the bass. And my wife doesn't have to work, and my children go to schools.
So what decade was that?
That was the 70s.
Around the 70s. Okay.
Okay. So this guy, Bob Arrowsmith.
Bob, yep.
And I was his only student. And he kind of he was a lovely, lovely man. Really, really good, straight down the line guy.
Yeah.
Which also brings me to, there's been 3 people who actually had their birthdays on the same day, not the same year, but the same day, that were mammoth influences in my life. My mother, Bob Arrowsmith, was the same birthday as my mother.
Yep.
And Walter Becker was the same birthday as my mother. And those 3 people have given me a lot of encouragement and a lot of support and a lot of wisdom.
Yeah.
But Bob, those were the days when there was a lot of work for musicians. And so Bob always put me in on gigs. But it only put me in on gigs that were good gigs.
Yeah.
And so I remember doing like going in and doing the Easter, 12-hour fundraiser TV show, and going in and subbing on Bob's for gigs, so he gave me lots of opportunities. Then I finished school, and then straight after school, my first gig was actually working at a place called the Swag Man.
Oh, the old Swag Man.
7 nights a week, year round.
Yeah.
And 2 on Saturday and 2 on Sunday. So I was there.
And that was backing a lot of shows too, back in those days. The dancers and the. I remember being a kid going to the station. Yep.
I remember Judy Green.
Oh, right. And then, so there was actually a lot of good opportunities that were passed down to me that I like to, when things come along, to give other people opportunities to pass it down, because we tend to forget that music isn't something that you learn from a book or you learn from a school or anything. Music is something, it's like family. It's passed down.
Yeah.
There's a definite lineage. Because then I learned from Bob for a year or so, a couple of years, and then he said, "Okay, I've taught you all I can teach you. You have to go to my teacher now."
Yeah.
Who was a guy called Marian Brasher, who taught, who was actually a professor of music from Vienna, who played under Stravinsky and all of that sort of stuff.
Wow.
And so I learned from him for a couple of years.
Wow.
And he was the old school European and
strict.
Yeah.
Super strict.
Yeah, but he really liked me. So
yeah,
but you do.
He didn't use any rulers or anything on you.
No.
Oh, okay.
No, you just Like you did the work, and he was fine. Like I don't know what it was like if there's if people didn't do the work, he probably just sort of was indifferent to them, perhaps. But he was like engaging and involved. So that was great. So and then there was actually plenty of work around.
Yeah.
And I was always just I remember it wasn't until from finishing school at 17 until I was about 26, I'd never had a Saturday night off.
Yeah.
I didn't know, I'd always be working.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of working, you had a period back in the early 80s where you were playing on like 2 out of 3 of the jingles on like the TV commercials and the radio and TV and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So what were some of those tunes that you actually played on? I know when we had the pizza, you were talking about Life Be In It. And I've gone, I remember that.
The Life Be In It jingle. Yeah, I played on those. There's quite, a lot of commercials, a lot of the banks, a lot of the because even Coca-Cola, because even those were the days when, say, they weren't allowed to bring soundtracks from overseas. So if it was a Coke ad, they had to re-record the music.
I believe they still do that now.
Do that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so at that point, what would happen was there's a big budgets going around, because there was basically a half a dozen jingle writers in just Melbourne who, whenever there was, say, Carlton United, we did all of those. Whenever every year they'd
budget,
but they'd do a new jingle.
New jingle, yep.
And that would go out to 5 or 6 different writers to write a jingle, right?
And then they'd get the best one.
Yes, but I was in the fortunate position of playing bass for like most of the writers.
Yeah,
because I'd always look at, like, when I'm playing on someone else's track, I'd always kind of think, well, okay, if they were a bass player, what would they play?
Yeah,
because then you serve, in a way, then you can serve the music better.
Yeah. So back in those days, like the early 80s and so on, what would your week consist of? Was it like, like Monday to Friday, you'd be most of the time during the day in the studio, or what sort of...
Going in the studio and going between studios, like at a start, generally it would be Monday and Tuesday mornings starting at 8 o'clock. And you do...
That's against musicians' rules.
Yeah. But you do like 2 hours, because they had to you do the band tracks first. And this was actually before click tracks or anything like that. So you'd have to do a 30-second, 60-second, and 45-second, and you know, 5-second stingers and all that sort of stuff. But you'd have to it'd have to be very consistent.
And was that recorded a full band, or was that single tracks?
No, full band,
Full band.
rhythm section. Like usually 2 guitars, electric piano or piano, drums and bass.
Yeah.
And you'd spend a couple of hours doing perhaps 4 or 5 different jingles. I was working for a guy, Peter Best, who was doing a lot of jingles at that time, and he'd regularly have 10 subs a week. Subs were submissions.
Yeah.
So you'd spend, you know, an hour or two, you know, you'd basically, for each track it'd only take 10, 15 minutes. You'd basically run it once and then, okay, let's put it down.
Yeah.
Because the reason why I was at 8 o'clock is because then after 10 o'clock, the singers would start coming in and overdubbing the singing, and then the strings afterwards. So then at the end of the day, they'd have a couple of hours and then they'd to mix all the tracks. Yeah. So Mondays and Tuesdays were that. And then after that, you know, you go from 8 to 10, then maybe at 11 o'clock go to another studio and play on some other
the same
tracks.
Sort of thing.
Yeah. And then sometimes in the afternoons and the evenings, you'd play on albums and stuff.
Cool.
Or also there was a lot of work provided by publishers who would have writers, and they would give writers budgets to do demos.
Yeah.
So you get a lot of writers that would hire to, you know, play on a demo of their songs.
Yeah. Now, back in those days, there was a big band. I mean, I was really a kid back in those days, and I wasn't really switched on with all this sort of stuff. But there was a band called Pyramid.
Yeah.
Now, I tried to search some recordings of Pyramid, and I couldn't find it. Like, you know how you normally go YouTube, let's find some songs on Pyramid. I look at Pyramid and it shows you everything about Giza and all that sort of stuff over in Egypt. But I believe you have a recording for us tonight of...
Yes. Well, actually, this is a recording that was done after I'd left Pyramid. But it was actually written by a wonderful bass player who actually replaced me in Pyramid. A wonderful bass player whose son is actually another wonderful bass player.
Yeah.
This bass player, he used to do a lot of studio work and everything. A guy called Michael Clark. His son, Travis Clark, is a beautiful bass player around Melbourne. Anyway, so Mike wrote this song called Total Comeback for me. And this, I believe, is one of the very first digital recordings in the Southern Hemisphere. It was made in about 1980 when AAV Metropolis had just gotten their first Sony 24-track. And, of course, they were looking at so the engineers needed some practice on it.
Yeah.
So I got the engineer, Scott Hemming, who used to engineer a lot of the Peter Best stuff that I played on. So we went in on a weekend and recorded this track. So I'd put it together with the Juno 80, playing an arpeggiated thing, and a Linn drum. So I'd lay up these sort of things and kind of done the arrangement and everything and laid it down. And then my old bandmates, David Jones on drums and David Hirschfelder on keyboards, came in.
Now, just because a lot of people will go, are their names, but we'll give some credits of what David Jones has done.
It's a big store rivaling Myers.
No, it's not that David Jones.
Okay. No, David Jones is a wonderful, wonderful natural musician. Just recently, a wonderful piano player, Joe Kendamo, did a concerto for David Jones, which was recently performed by the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra.
Yeah,
and David Jones is a true original. Like, he's got a beautiful touch and sound to his playing.
Yeah, and David is a drummer, of course.
David Jones is a drummer, and David Hirschfelder went on to.
Well, he did Farnham.
He put
Whispering
together,
Jack.
He put together Whispering Jack.
Yeah,
and then after that, he wanted to expand into film music.
Yeah,
and then he did Strictly Born the film and. Elizabeth, Sliding Doors, Shine, lots and lots of films.
Yeah. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hear a song that song that you were talking about, Total Comeback.
Total Comeback,
And then we'll talk more.
So this is in 1980. I think I was about 20.
Okay, cool. So that was Total Comeback.
Yeah.
And that's creative. I mean, you listen to music of today, and there's no content. I don't know. There's no content in it compared to what you did there. So, yeah.
Mm.
So back in the day, you did some TV work as well.
Yeah.
So you did Don Lane.
Yeah. Young Talent Time Band.
Yeah.
I did, which, that was a whole band, big band and everything. So those sessions like to start at 9 o'clock in the morning, go through to 12, and you'd have basically, they were all thoroughly arranged. So like you'd...
so that was back in the day with the Young Talent Time. Was that back in the day when Tina Arena was there?
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
So you'd actually, the hardest thing about that is you'd kind of be doing all these kind of recent pop songs, in different keys. Like a bass line that was written for a thing in E sounds completely different if you're playing in A flat.
Yeah, I know that.
So
yeah.
Anyway, so that was but then that was Graham Morgan was a drummer on those things.
Yep.
And so it was great. You get one run through, and then you'd actually have to.
Who was playing guitar?
Charlie Gould and Don Stevenson.
Okay. Yeah.
Two guitars. It was always usually two guitars.
Yeah.
On these sessions, and Peter McCutcheon, Peter Jones, Peter's on piano.
Yeah.
Bootsy. Yeah. So lots of. And
back in those days, you did a fair bit of touring as well. So you toured with Now, let me have a look at this list because it's a massive list. You toured with Men at Work, Glenn Shorrock, Brian Cadd, Don McLean, and that's Don McLean from the American Pie fame.
Sure. Yeah.
Colin Hay, Vince Jones, Broderick Smith,
Yeah.
and I mean the list just keeps going on.
Yeah. They weren't all at the same time. It was
Oh no. Yeah.
But you know there were things. So like my first kind of main gig was actually being a musical director for Broderick Smith, and we did an album which was it still sounds contemporary, and we used to tour quite a bit and had really good band. And I can remember like we'd spend a week up in Sydney, but I'd actually be flying back to Melbourne to do studio gigs, like catch the 5 o'clock in the morning flight down, record until about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, catch a flight back up to Sydney, then go and do the gig with Broderick.
Wow.
And so that was a busy time.
Yeah.
And all those other people, like so with Glenn Shorrock, it was actually just doing album work and recording with him. I didn't do tours because he'd just finished with the LRB at that point, or was starting to put his fans. But then I did a lot of work with Brian Cadd, a couple of tours. Yeah. And I also did all the arrangements for when 3XY.
Oh, that's going back.
Yeah, 3XY went to stereo. So that's
from AM to FM.
Yes,
wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is the days of when I say to people, man, you've got to remember radio in those days didn't sound any better than your iPhone speaker. That was AM.
Yeah.
In fact, the iPhone speaker sounded better than any radio did then.
Yeah, yeah.
But then, so I did all the arrangements for CAD for the XY commercials. Yeah. Going, here we are in stereo.
Yeah.
And then I worked a lot with Brian Brown, who was a kind of like an experimental musician, but fearless and totally believing in Australian music. And he actually hired David Jones and I when we were 18, 19, and we were like the young lions.
Yeah.
And that was a really wonderful experience to be able to be under an umbrella or under a tree that let you be anything you wanted to do.
Yeah.
So that was actually really exciting.
Now, when you were playing with Men at Work, you played at Band Aid.
Yes. Yeah.
So now, was that Band Aid like they did one show in Europe and one show in Australia and thing, or was that you were overseas?
No. That was Band Aid was a international thing to raise money.
Money. Yep.
It was put together by Bob Geldorf, wasn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
And Mid-Year, was it? That was Do They Know It Was Christmas?
Yeah, no, that I think that was Christmas. But the Band Aid thing.
Band Aid thing. Yes, no. Well, that was when I was with Men at Work, and for the Australian contingent, they put a concert on at Hordern Pavilion that was streamed, or in those days, I don't think they had streaming in those days, but it was Men at Work were the only Australian contingent that was shown on American TV. But it all happened at the same time in England and America. Yeah. And I think Bowie.
So I remember I was quite young back in those days, but I remember the Band Aid thing happening and,
Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah.
An audience of billions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's some YouTube clips of that up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, I also see in your, by the way, Jeremy sent me his bio, and it's about this, actually. It's about this thick. And I had to read through the bio to get some info. I have to admit, it's so much information in there. It's awesome. Now, you also played on the theme songs for Crocodile Dundee, the movie.
Yeah.
And Countdown.
Yeah, one of the Countdown things.
Yeah.
In the early mid 80s. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that came out. The Crocodile Dundee thing was I was doing a lot of sessions for Peter Best, who was a jingle writer who then wrote the score for the soundtrack for Crocodile Dundee and ended up playing on quite a few tracks for that. And it's funny looking back because it was just like another day.
Yeah.
You know. And I'm in a way sometimes astounded by looking back and going, oh, okay, yeah, oh, I was part of that. Where it was really just what, like you get up and you go to work. And, you just try and do the best you can. And there you go.
That brings me to the next tune that you did, which is really, and I'm going to set the scene, all right? And you remember, we were talking about this before. We were doing that. This was the first time I ever worked with you, and we were working at Williamstown down above the pier there near the big ship.
Yep.
And there was I can't remember if there was a DJ playing or something. And anyway, they played the iconic song that is like the theme song for a lot of Australians these days. And whenever it's played at a party, everybody just goes nuts. And everybody starts singing it. And everybody's arms go up in the air and you hear him singing, I'll be riding on the horses, yeah, yeah. And you played on that.
Yeah,
you were the bass player on that.
I was the bass player on Daryl's version, on Daryl Braithwaite's version of that song.
Yeah.
There's a funny story with that, actually. Well, it's not funny, it's just how that came to be. Well, I'd been living in the United States for a number of years, from basically 1985 through to 1990. And in 1989, I'd mainly been living in New York. In 1989, I was in Los Angeles, and I was actually hanging out with Walter Becker, who was at that point working on an album for Ricky Lee Jones. I don't know if you know, but Walter Becker and Ricky Lee Jones wrote that song, The Horses. Mm-hmm. I'd met Ricky Lee Jones a few times before. Once I was recording an album in London, and I believe this was a year or so earlier than, it's actually a couple of years earlier than when I was in Los Angeles with Walter and Ricky Lee Jones. But Ricky was looking for a producer at that time, I believe, and I was working on an album in London, and the producer was a guy, Robin Miller, who'd done the Sade stuff. So she'd come into the studio and was hanging out one evening, and while I was actually on the album that I was working on, I was overdubbing a couple of bass solos, just melodic things that the track seemed to need. And so she was just sitting at the couch listening, and she's lovely and just all warm and supportive and everything. And then next time I met her I was actually in New York, and I was playing in a band with Jeff Pivar, who's a wonderful guitarist, and Ben Porowski, a drummer. And we'd been playing in different situations, and they were both touring with her at that point. And I think that was about 1987, 1988. So then 1989, I was in Los Angeles. So they'd recorded this song called The Horses, and it was on a Ricky Lee Jones album called Flying Cowboys. And then I got back to Australia in 1990, and I hooked up again with Daryl, because I'd worked with Daryl and B. Birtles on a project that was just developing, so we were doing lots of demos and working on songs. So with Daryl and B, so I hooked up with Daryl when I got back. That was 6 years earlier, 1983 or 84 that I was working. So I hooked up with Daryl and I played him the song, The Horses.
And he loved it.
Yeah, well, and then the next thing I get a call from his producer. Oh, look, we're doing this on The Horses. Would you come play bass on it?
Wow.
So I sort of turned up, and that's a fretless bass on that.
Yeah.
That's a Steinberger fretless on that track, The Horses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I'll never forget that night that we did that gig. And I have to admit, because, I mean, you know, I've met a few people in time, and this goes to sort of, in a way, it shows when you've done a lot of things like you have, you look at things very differently to people that haven't done a lot of things, or they brag about a lot of things that they've done. And we were standing at the back of the dance floor, and we're watching everybody with their arms in the air, and everybody's going crazy, dancing and dancing and dancing and singing, I'll be riding in the... And I turned and looked at you and I said, Jeremy, seeing this, how do you feel with knowing that you're the bass player on this song? And you just turned around and said, I'm humbled. And it's just like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. You know, normally I'd expect like, well, you know, we went in the studio and we, you know, ripped it to shreds and we did this. But it was like, no, well, we didn't expect it to be this big.
No, well, you never go, like I've always lived by the thing of serendipity. You never go in going, we're going to change the world. You just do the best you can, the best you possibly can, and let the things... Let yourself be guided by whatever happens rather than trying to make things happen or rather than having a plan with an outcome. That never works. You know, like I always enjoy that sort of the little joke, you know, how do you make God laugh? You tell him your plans.
Yeah. Yeah,
for the future.
I suppose that's my yeah, you could be right. You know.
Sorry, Will. Jeremy, we've got a question online there.
Sure.
Who is the biggest artist in your eyes that you've worked with? Trick question.
I look. Okay. I would think that the one that I would see that has made a huge contribution to music and to humanity and to culture. So that's not necessarily the most popular. But honestly, I'd have to say the biggest two people that I've worked with who were also the most humble and the most giving were actually Herbie Hancock and Wayne Shorter.
Wow. You didn't have to think that hard about it.
Like I've worked with a lot of people that have sold lots of records and that have, you know, the household names and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think the it has to come, you know, the biggest heart, the biggest contribution, and contribution meaning extension of what's come before and opening up possibilities for the future.
Right. Yeah.
You know? So, so that's, you know, I have to qualify that. But then, you know, I don't know. I haven't worked with them yet. I haven't worked with the next biggest thing yet. So, and who knows what that's going to be? It could be anyone.
Yeah. It could be a DJ.
Well,
you never know.
You never know. Like I actually say to people, you know, where the guitar was the folk music instrument of the 60s, the folk music instrument of today is the laptop, the computer, the tablet, or the iPhone. Because as Louis Armstrong used to say, it's all folk music because it's all made by folks.
Yeah.
So, a tablet is just a piece of technology. The same way that a piano is an amazing piece of pre-industrial age technology.
Yeah.
It's just technology. I saw a thing on Facebook the other, you know, you can buy fonts of songwriters, you know. So, you know, you can buy a font of John Lennon's, you know, or Lennon.
Yeah.
And it's not about the font, it's about the content.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what font, doesn't matter what instrument it is. It's the content of it.
Yeah.
You know, that's why there's been great musicians that you call great musicians regardless of the instrument that they're playing. It doesn't matter what instrument it is.
Yeah. So now talking about gear, because you mentioned piano, right? You play the NS basses.
Yeah.
Previously, they used to be known as Steinberger basses.
Yeah.
But then they got bought out by Gibson, and everything sort of changed. And now, you know Ned Steinberger as well.
Yes, I've met him. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And why do you play? I mean, I know why, but why do you play this Ned Steinberger, the NS basses?
Okay. Well, I really like forward thinking and good creative thinking in any endeavour. Ned Steinberger is an engineer. He's not a musician.
Yep.
He was a cabinet maker. I used to love making chairs.
Yep.
But then he saw stringed instruments, and being a thoughtful guy, he thought, well, hang on, we're in the 20th century now. We have technology and tools. Like now, in any endeavor, you want your tools to be as intuitive and as at the highest level possible. A surgeon doesn't want a kitchen knife; he wants a scalpel.
Scalpel, yeah.
So, and I look at music like medicine. Like, would you go to a surgeon that said, "Man, I've got this, this old school knife, man. It's 1960s. It's fantastic. It's analog. Let me cut." And you go, "No, thanks. I want to just go the keyhole surgery things. I just want to go with the things that have been developed further." And so the thing with Ned is like this is actually his NS, which is a beautiful 5-string bass. It's actually the only bass that was actually engineered as a 5-string. All the other 5-string basses have been started as a 4-string,
and then they put the 5th on there.
So there's a lot of inherent problems that start with that.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like going, okay, so we've got a round hole and a square peg. We'll just keep hitting the square peg in the round hole till it fits.
Yeah.
And so there's always going to be unnecessary compromises. And now we live in a time where we have lots of great, regardless of where things are made, the quality of the tooling that makes the instruments, the instruments that come out of China are fantastic because they've been made with good quality good, well-engineered plans. So anyway, this is actually one of Ned's first forays.
And it still looks new.
Yeah, and it still sounds great.
Yeah.
And so he basically said, well, why do we have the place where the most tension is also the most fragile on stringed instruments?
That's right.
That comes back from pre-Iron Age, because pre-Iron Age was violins and viola gambulas, where they had to have wooden pins.
Yep.
You couldn't have tuning pegs. So that was just, we've always got to have the tuning pegs up here. Well, no, you don't. So he kind of thought, well, why don't I put the tuning pegs where the most mass is and where the most secure part of the instrument is, and just reverse it. And now we have the technology. We can make, everything's got ball ends, violins, the whole lot. So, that's not just gut strings tied up in knots.
Yeah.
Let's just do this. So he actually did that, and then took it one step further and thought, graphite, great material. It has, if I listen, it has the same acoustic properties as wood, but it's 1,000 times more stable. Why don't I make a neck out of graphite? Because the majority of sound of any stringed instrument is actually from the neck.
Yep.
So he did that, and it's and so this is actually one from the 1980s. Beautiful instrument.
Yeah.
And it's not a lot has changed. Well, it's actually like good instruments. You have to play them. because there's a great saying like it's about the molecules. When you make a sound, the molecules move. So good instruments are only good instruments because they're played well.
Yeah.
And when you pay attention and play well, then the instruments, like you and like the music that you play, gets better.
Seeing you've got that, let's have a jam.
Oh, okay.
Now, this is totally spontaneous. So,
Sorry, Will.
yes.
While I got you, what's that square thing right behind you?
Oh, this.
Okay.
Actually, we need to thank. Let's do the big the big plug. Is Marty tuned in yet? No, he hasn't. Right? He's probably in Sydney or something. This is supplied by Marcello Grassi, and the guys down at Eastgate Music.
Yep.
Now you picked this up today, didn't you?
Yes, actually, Eastgate Music are now the distributors of NS in Australia, and I will be doing later in the year some clinics with the NS range of equipment, but also he does this great range of little bass amps and little and big bass amps, the Phil Jones bass, which is absolutely gorgeous.
Yep. Now you've already had a play with this particular amp. Tell us what you think.
It's great for two reasons. The first reason is that it's got a really even sound. It uses 5-inch speakers, which means that the sound that comes out of the speaker remains fairly uniform throughout the whole room where you are, and also the tone remains consistent at different volume levels, which is with a lot of bass amps, you change the volume and the tone can change quite drastically. Also, it's very, very light and very small.
It is, it's tiny.
and it's loud. And Phil Jones was involved in a lot of studio monitors and powered monitors. Will's just going to pick up.
That's the top speaker there.
Yeah, there's two speakers.
Yeah.
Actually, this is a standalone speaker, and then this is a powered speaker. So basically, that's 70 watts, and that's 70 watts by itself as well. So then that's got 100 watts of good, clean power.
Yeah.
But so Phil Jones had spent a lot of time designing and building studio monitors. So there's a really interesting thing with bass. Bass is primarily a supportive instrument, as part of the foundation. So for designing a speaker for bass, you actually have to understand how bass works in the mix.
Yep.
And I think he's just captured it really well. And, the response, you can always tell with a speaker or any monitoring system how good it is by the response to your fingers and your touch.
Yeah.
The same way that, say, a violinist goes, I can work with this bow or I can't work with this bow.
Now, we're going to have a jam now, but with what you're hearing through the Facebook network and so on, and the streaming, you're not really going to hear this amp. I mean, this amp is like mind-blowing. We actually heard it when we went to see Igor Zvedra, and it was just jaw-dropping what the sound that was coming out of it, and that was in a pretty big area too at the shop. So, but let's do something and make some.
I reckon. Let's.
It's totally your call. Do you want to play on that one or the other one?
Well, look, I might grab the other one because this another cool Ned Steinberg thing. He actually put in piezo mics, which will actually on the bass, which
sort of complement the
it'll actually
acoustic.
blend better with the acoustic.
And I thought I'd bring in the classical guitar tonight just to be a bit more. What's the word for it?
Accommodating.
A bit more. Let's go back to the roots,
And do we thank Eastgate for giving us donating that
Absolutely.
amp to the
Thank
studio?
you, Marchie, for donating
Thanks,
this
Marchie.
amp to the studio.
It works perfectly in here.
It's beautiful in here. We will cherish it for you, and we'll keep it on this pedestal for you as well. So now I bet you Margie's going to call us up and say, "No, man, get out."
He's just fallen off his chair.
Very nice, very nice. Or something like that. And that song was called "Or Something Like That." So going back to the stuff you've done, in the 90s, you were playing with a band called Island of Men.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And you were filling in. And and sort of sharing the duties, correct? Mm-hmm. For a bass player called Tony Levin.
Yeah, sure. Tony Levin.
Yeah. Levin, yeah. Now, tell us about that.
Okay.
Because he's got a reputation at art.
Yeah. Island of Men was a band. I was living up near in the Woodstock area, about 2 hours drive north of New York City, which was originally an artist colony from like the 1900s, and then it became a bit of a music hang because people lived up there.
Now you played in the All Stars band with the 20th anniversary, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yes,
yeah,
and that was a whole trippy thing. Yes, I'll get. So I was actually sharing a house with Jerry Marotta, drummer.
That's a photo we posted on Facebook.
Sure.
Yes.
You know, Jerry's, comes from a great line of drummers. His brother Rick Marotta, and Jerry played with Peter Gabriel and Hall and Oates, and lots and lots of people. Great drummer and really conscientious musician. Anyway, so we had this band called Island Men. We were working on original material with. And so we were actually living in a house that was owned by Michael Lang, who put the original Woodstock Festival together. And this house was actually called Tapau, where actually Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin used to live in the same house.
Wow.
So it was just a little house in the woods up behind Woodstock where we could, there wasn't any neighbours, so we could make a whole lot of noise all through the night. And then from that, like as in little country towns and stuff, there's a lot of good musicians live up in Woodstock. There was Pat Metheny, Tony Levin, Robbie Dupree, who I played on a couple of albums with, John Sebastian, who wrote Summer in the City and Welcome Back, Kotter. I played on a couple of albums with him. And so there's quite an artist community up there. And, there's a few kind of fun bands. One band was called Uncle Funk, where, just play a whole lot of old soul tunes. And basically, it was either Tony or I used to play bass with that.
Yeah.
And then I ended up, subbing for Tony on a couple of gigs in New York and stuff, a couple of sessions and studio stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So
and at that time, like I decided, that was still a time when there was studio musicians and road musicians and touring musicians, and I never really wanted to be to play in other people's bands kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because if you're playing with David Bowie, you're playing in the best David Bowie cover band.
Yeah,
because you still, I always like to be part of being creative and making it interesting.
Yeah,
and hopefully always developing.
Yeah.
So I decided to actually just stay in New York and work on original stuff and work on studio stuff.
So when you left Australia and you went to New York, did you tee things up before you went over to New York? Like, was it like you went out, like, did you just go over there and say, here's my luggage, here's my guitar? Okay.
Oh, well, it was a little bit different because I'd toured for a couple of years with Men at Work. At that point, it was actually the biggest band in the world.
Yep, they were playing in America anyway.
Yeah. And we'd just done what was to be the fourth Men at Work album. I'd done one album with them, and then this was going to be the fourth Men at Work album. And it was literally, $1 million budget and all that sort of stuff, which was huge in those days.
Yeah.
That would have bought you 10 houses in Port Melbourne.
Yeah.
You wouldn't even get one now.
No, that's right. So
sorry to interrupt you, Jeremy. Who was the drummer from Men at Work?
When I was with them, there was two great drummers. On the first album that I played with Men at Work, it was actually Mark Kennedy.
Oh, really?
And Mark is just the greatest Australian rock drummer. He's just wonderful. Great. And I've recently been playing with Mike Rudd from Spectrum. So I've been playing acoustic NS acoustic bass, and Mike's playing classical guitar, and George Petropoulos on piano chord, and we're doing all those old songs. The reason why I mentioned Mike Rudd, Mark Kennedy was 16 when he played on the original "I'll Be Gone" with Mike Rudd.
Wow!
So whenever you hear that track,
he was 16.
He was 16.
Yeah, we had the pleasure of Mark Kennedy on the show, actually.
Yeah, he's just such a beautiful guy, and a great drummer.
That's on the drum show, Drum Talk.
Yeah. And who was the other drummer?
And then the other drummer I was so fortunate. This thing of serendipity, coming back to that, because always really great things happen for no good reason, right? Now, one of the roadies on one of the first Men at Work tours before I was with them was a guy called Ted Gardner, who'd then gone on to stay in the States and become a roadie and gradually work up to be a tour manager. And he ended up putting together Lollapalooza. That was his big thing many years later. But he ended up working for Frank Zappa, right, as a roadie and then tour manager. And so we needed to find a drummer for a Men at Work tour. And, Ted Gardner actually suggested, well, it's Chad Wakeman. So I was incredibly blessed by being able to sit next to him, play music, and also be a friend to a really sweet, beautiful human human guide, which is Chad Wackerman. He's one
So
of
it's
the,
Chad Wackman. I didn't know that.
yeah,
Wow.
Chad Wackerman, one of the world's great drummers.
Unbelievable guy. But anyway, sorry. Let's
Yeah.
get back to guitar, guys.
So,
I know.
yeah, so
But
Chad,
that's amazing.
That's
I never knew that.
typical of you, Pino. It's
Sorry.
all about me, isn't it?
I wasn't
Drummers. It's always, this is called guitar talk.
I was just curious. I never knew who the drummers
but,
were
you
for
know,
Men at
there's,
Work.
there's that old
No,
saying,
no,
you know,
I know.
like, so many drummers, so little time.
Oh.
Yeah, just remind me to edit that.
Oh,
Sorry,
I like
guys.
that. I like that. I'm glad you said that. You put him in his box.
Oh. No.
Oh, okay. So then the 90s hit, and
Yeah.
you came back to Melbourne.
Yes.
To Melbourne.
Yes. Yep.
And when you came back to Melbourne, that's when you started education and all that sort of stuff.
Well, no, I'd started actually before because Brian Brown was the first head of music at the VCA.
Yep.
And so I was only 21 and I was already teaching at the VCA when I was,
Wow.
teaching. Because also, like at that time, particularly with electric bass, there was no one that had really given it much thought. I could, in terms of, depth of as an instrument.
Yeah.
So I was involved with that, and look, I've always been involved with teaching because actually the interesting thing is, like, my father was a teacher, right?
Did he teach music or?
No, he taught maths, chemistry,
Okay.
and loved teaching.
Yeah.
My mother worked in the office of the Institute of Early Childhood Education.
Yeah.
It was Kindergarten Teachers College. My uncle was a high school teacher, then principal, and then my aunt was actually had a passion for education, which she joined the Mothers Club, and then when there used to be Mothers Club in the school canteen.
Yeah.
And then was so passionate about education, she ended up entering politics and becoming Minister for Education and then Premier. And that was Joan Kerner. So she
Really?
Yeah. So education, and look, there's a really important thing. The best teachers are the ones that actually do it.
Yeah.
Because I've and even Bernstein said that, look, the primary thing of playing music is you're actually educating people, either to learn about themselves or to learn about other possibilities. From this wonderful, mysterious thing of music where you can't see it and you can't touch it, but it's real. So you can just learn from that. So I've always sort of felt that, like, it's not teaching. Learning is actually just sharing. Because if you're teaching well, you're learning a lot.
Yeah.
And then whoever you're spending time with is actually inspired.
Yeah. Look, I'll tell you now, as you know, and he's sitting opposite you. Oh, go and do your Dickie knee, go on, Jules.
Mr. Wheel.
A lot of people who know me know that Julian, my son, is actually learning off Jeremy, and I mean, from my son's point of view, every time he walks out of a lesson with you, he's just like, oh, man, I've got to practice. This is awesome. I've got to grow. I've got to move forward. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Only because you want to.
Yeah. And it's because he wants to. But not only that, it's because he's, like, as Sandra said, my wife, she went the first time she sat in on a lesson with you, she turned around and said, man, if I had a teacher like that, I would have continued playing, because you're so it's incredible. Like some of your techniques. Like Julian will come in and he'll go, "Oh, I'm all excited about this thing. I've got to show you this thing," and he shows you, but you've got that thing in your head. This is what we're going to work on today. And you go, "Yep, no problem. Let's do what we're going to do. Yep, okay, cool. You've done what you've done," and then you pull him back into line again, and it's all so
He incorporates it with it.
everything's incorporated.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, because you can only learn what you want to learn.
Yeah.
You know, you're not going to learn if you don't want to, if you're not interested in it. And so it's a teacher's job to actually be able to see the light of your inspiration and let that illuminate other things within yourself, and do just things to help you get there. You know.
So, talking more about the education, right? Back, I don't know what year it would have been, but you were involved in the AMEB exams and also the syllabus, and also the Year 12 VCE syllabus.
Yeah. Well, that was with the AMEB. It was the very first year that electric bass became a legitimate instrument.
Wow.
So we had to put together a curriculum, pieces and stuff. So and obviously I think that was about early 1990s. A guy called Neil Kennedy was influential in putting that together. Neil used to then run the Box Hill TAFE, the music thing there, and now he's making bass guitars, Cole Clark. And they're beautiful, beautiful instruments. Yeah. Anyway, so we actually had to put together. So Neil and I've kind of put together a list of things that would benefit kids and also show a degree of legitimacy. So a piano teacher couldn't go, "Oh, that's silly. It's simple." Let's go. Yeah. Oh, no. So and now fortunately, bass guitar is part of VCE and AMEB, but more importantly, because in those days you could only do individual instruments, where now you can do bands. Yeah, and that's the thing with music, is that it puts you in touch with other people to play music, and bass guitar is not a solo instrument. Bass guitar is an instrument that is a lot of fun to play with other instruments, and that's actually that's a wonderful thing that's evolved into being able to be a group assessment as well. Yeah. And so I'm just gonna scream out a few things that you've done, because everyone needs to know this sort of stuff. It's amazing. So you play with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. Sure. Yeah. Now, when you're playing with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, you're doing all the classical stuff. Yes, but usually the electric bass. Yeah. Okay, so you're playing electric bass, not upright. Yeah. No. Generally with the MSO. Yep. I'm like the principal electric bass player. Okay. So whenever over the last 20 years, whenever they've done, or 20 or 30 years, whenever they've done things that need electric bass, I get called to see if I can do it. Yep. And you did some gigs with when you played with Tonight Live with the Steve Izard show? Yeah. How did you get that? Oh, that was the sort of again serendipity. I'd just come back in December at the start of 1990 back to Australia. I'd hooked up with my old friend Bob Vinier. Yep. Went up to his place and just hung out, and I was telling him about some of the stuff I'd been involved with doing in the States, and we just hang out. Then the Vizard show started, and Bob was in the band for that. And the band for that was actually it was Paul Grabowski's band. Yep. With Andrew Gander on drums, which was wonderful. Yep. Anyway, Gary Costello was a bass player. Yep. First week of the show, Gary broke his finger. So I was, and then Bob just mentioned to Grabowski that I was back, and I got a call the next day to come in and do the show. So I did it like 6 weeks until Gary's finger got better. Six or 8 weeks of the show in 1990, which was great because it was the very first time that show had been on, and admittedly, although people didn't know it in Australia, it was just a rip-off of the David Letterman show.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And
yeah.
I remember saying to the producers and the directors, man, as soon as the David Letterman show comes to Australia, this is going to be over.
Yeah.
Because it was just exactly, it didn't need to be the same format. But for some reason, the guys with the money thought that it
How many years did that last in the end?
I think
they went for
4 years.
3 or 4 years, yeah.
Because Grabowski did it for 1991, and then maybe 3 years, and then I did it, and then Sam Seed was the MD,
yeah,
and I did it in Sam's band for 2 years or something.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that was great, like employment.
Yeah. Yeah, but you also played on the Don Lane show.
Yeah, oh, that was many years.
That's many years.
And like all those other, like even like a Ronnie Corbett show.
Yes.
Yeah, like Ronnie Corbett. Like for some reason, Channel 9 had organised for him to do 6 or 12 shows in Australia, and Tommy Tico was the musical director.
So when Ronnie Corbett was here, did he actually mingle with the band, or was he just like, I'm here, you're there?
Oh, no, he's very pleasant, very charming. But, you know, like on those shows, everyone's got their
job to do. Yeah.
And, you know, he was concentrating on what
he had to do.
Yeah. You know, like, it's showbiz.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And you know, a lovely man, very kind. You can always tell when people are kind. Yeah. By nature.
So you've also played with, I just see that Jack Pantazis is watching. Hello, Jack. How you doing? You've also worked with Marsha Hines.
Yeah, played on records.
Deborah Byrne, Olivia Newton-John.
Yeah.
You did the Hey Hey It's Saturday.
Yeah, filled it, played on that a few times. Both as an artist as well as in the band. Yep.
And you've worked with James Morrison.
Yeah.
You've backed Tom Jones.
Yeah, played with Tom Jones.
Albert Lee.
Beautiful guitarist.
Oh, Steve Morse.
Yeah, great guitarist. And I played in New York with his drummer from Dixie Dregs, Rod Morgenstern. Did quite a few projects with him while I was in New York.
Yeah. And also Pino.
I'm just speechless. It's all right.
Pino.
I'm dumbfounded.
He's worked with someone that you love.
No.
Jack DeJohnette.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, Jack DeJohnette lived up in the Woodstock area.
Yep.
And I was actually hired by him to do some transcriptions of some of his pieces and stuff. And I used to go up to his house in Willow, just outside of Woodstock, and hang out and go down to his music room and jam with him. It was lovely.
Yeah,
and he was such a lovely, you know, kind of medicine man, you know.
He's pretty calm and cool and collected.
Medicine?
Medicine man, you know, like he's like shaman.
Yeah. And then you also did a whole bunch of theatre shows as well.
Yes, yeah.
So you've done Dusty, the musical.
Yeah.
Priscilla, the musical.
Yeah.
Fame, Strictly Ballroom.
Yeah. Saturday Night Fever was one of the first ones that I filled in on a couple of them over the years. But then in, I think, 2004, an old student of mine actually passed the, this was, students are great, they give you gigs. No, a student of mine, you know, everything comes around. You help people out, and they, you know, he gave me the gig for Saturday Night Fever, and so I did that for a year or so.
Yeah,
all around Australia and New Zealand and Hong Kong and Kuala Lumpur.
We're going to play a track. This track's off Looking for Jack. This is one of your
off
your anthology.
Yes, and this is a track It was recorded in London. I wrote the track in Los Angeles, staying at the I forgot the name of the apartment, but Sly Stone used to live in the next apartment block in Burbank, and I was staying in an apartment there. And I wrote this tune, then finished it off with Colin Hay, and then this is a song called "Looking for Jack," but this is the version, not off the album. This version has, because when we were recording it in London, Colin said, "Oh, do you hear anything else on the track?" Because we recorded the whole album as a trio, basically Chad Wackerman, myself, and Colin, and so that they sort of said, Colin said, "Oh, is there anything else you hear?" And I said, "Well, yeah, actually, on this track, I'd like to hear some piano and some soprano sax." And hey, look at this. Herbie Hancock's coming into town, and then Wayne Shorter's in town the week after. Fortunately, they were on the same record label as we were, so it was actually fairly easy
to get them
to get in contact. And that was a deeply humbling moment, actually, giving Herbie Hancock a chart of my tune, and then sitting next to him on the piano, while he actually did the piano part. And then I had to go in. So Herbie just played the track down a few times and said, "Oh, you can pick what you like out of that." So then I had to come in the next day and edit together the track. And it was a beautiful thing because although he played different things on every take, I could have cut anywhere in any take, anywhere in the bar,
and it worked,
and it would still work.
Wow.
So although there were radically different emotions, it still had this wonderful continuity of flow. And so then I put that together. The next week, Wayne Shorter came in, and the first thing he did was he walked up and said, Herbie's put his hand on this. Yeah. And then Wayne played some beautiful, beautiful things. So this is actually just off a cassette that I was running in the studio, off the desk, just so I had reference of everything.
Yeah.
And then as Wayne Shore was leaving the session, he just walked up to me and gave me a really big hug and he said, "Man, you take care," And I didn't see Wayne until until maybe 20 years later, and he was just incredibly warm to me again. And then why I dug this track up with Wayne is because I've been doing Saturday Night Fever, and I'd heard that Wayne Shorter was coming to Australia with his quartet, and I knew John Patitucci was in. John's a friend from when I was living in California, and we'd keep in sporadic contact and everything. So and then Wilbur Wild called me up to ask me if I could do a gig, and I said, "Oh no, I can't. I'm going to Hong Kong the next day." Hong Kong, I won't be around. And then I said, "Oh, you're going to go and see Wayne Shorter?" And he said, "Oh no, I can't. I'm doing it, but I'm interviewing him on the radio." And so I told him that story of Wayne being really warm to me and all that sort of stuff. And he said, and Wolf said, "Oh, have you got that track?" And I thought, "Oh man, yeah, I have it somewhere on a cassette." So I kind of went through my whole cassettes and dug it up and then Pro Tooled it and then gave Wilbur a copy, and he started the radio show
with
Wayne Shorter with that track.
Wow!
And then Wayne Shorter got in contact with me, and then I spent the rest of the day and the evening and the two nights just hanging with him and his wife, and it was really special, really
amazing.
Lovely. And again, really supportive and warm. So anyway, this is that song "Looking for Jack." Chad Wackerman on drums.
We're having a bit of a technical hitch with that one. Looks like. Yeah.
That's my apology, guys.
That's Pino.
So on this track, it's Herbie Hancock on piano, Wayne Shore on soprano saxophone, Chad Wackerman on drums, and Colin Hay on guitar and vocals, myself on bass.
Wow.
I know what the problem is, guys. Give me about 2 minutes. It's a WAV file. I didn't realise that. Because it loaded in.
How do you confuse a drummer? Give him a wave file. Boom.
Have a
Tish.
chat. I'll get this track online.
Yeah. Okay, you get that up and running. So, Jeremy.
Yes.
With you're working on your own anthology albums.
Yes.
How many albums have you got?
Well, I'm up to volume 11, but that's a bit Spinal Tap.
Now you've got anthology Jeremy Alsop anthology number 1, number 2, number 3.
Just all pieces of music that I've instigated, put together, produced, written, some that I, and basically music that I've made. You know,
So
so
is this
not
music
so much tracks that I've played on. This is music that I've
that
made.
you've done in your studio?
Yes.
So is this sort of stuff that, say for example, because I know you've done some stuff with Christine Sullivan and stuff. So if you've done stuff like that, is that part of this?
Well, yes, because with Christine, I was basically kind of like her MD. So pretty much I'd pick the songs and do the arrangements and organise the bands and the people and everything, and pretty much put the whole thing together, and she'd just sing. And
with that, for if people want to like download your albums and stuff, is there a website that they can go to?
Yep, jeremyalsop.com.
Okay, that's not hard.
No, it's not. You got to put www.
Oh yeah, www.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
And there's all on that, and you can buy it, you can listen to it, and whatever you like.
Yeah. Okay, now Pino's put his thumb up at me.
I think I've got the track now, so I've just converted it to an MP3.
So this is
Fingers crossed.
Looking for Jack.
Doesn't want to give it to us.
Technology. Don't you just love it?
There's no empathy with that.
No.
It's
It
not-
just doesn't want to be heard.
It's got me a bit
That's all right.
stumped.
That's all right. We'll play it. We'll get it up and running, and we'll play it next week. So, and speaking of next week, we have joining us in the studio. Now, I know this is called Guitar Talk, and tonight we had Jeremy Alsop, who is a extraordinary bass player.
Bass
guitarist, yes. Now, next week we have another bass guitarist by the name of Robbie Little.
Oh, wonderful.
Who's joining us.
He's fantastic.
Yep, and as Marcel Yamuni had made a comment when Marcel was on, when we were having the pizza like we had tonight, we should get those pizzas for free, you know. Oh, yeah. So anyway,
what was it? Melrose Pizza.
Melrose Pizza. They make a nice pizza, don't they?
Yeah.
Look, we're giving them a plug in that. They didn't even give us any deals, not even free drinks.
I think we need to hit them up.
Anyway, Marcel made a comment, and I sort of went, yeah, you're right. And Marcel said he would be Australia's version of Nathan East.
Sure.
And yeah, so next week we have Robbie Little, and I'm looking forward to hearing what Robbie's got to say, because Rob works with me at GH Music, and some of the stories he's got of being on the road with Tommy Emmanuel and stuff is absolutely mind-blowing. I wonder if he'll talk about some of the Russian tours and stuff. What stays on the road, you know. Anyway, so that's for next week. And next week I'll also have a track from an Italian guitarist. I'm not going to tell you his name now, but you listen to it for next week. He's a session guitarist from Italy, who sent in some tracks, and he's he's got some beautiful stuff. So, and I'm going to put him into the up and coming, even though he's not really up and coming because he's nailing the gigs in Italy and so on. But we'll be playing Lelio's stuff next week. Oh, there you go. I just gave you his name. So, and
you can't even keep a secret to yourself.
I know, I can't even keep the secret to myself. On Monday nights, we have Drum Talk with Pino Bertolini.
Yeah.
And Pino, thank you for tonight. You've been awesome.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yep. And on Tuesday, is On the Mic starting next week?
Yes, it's starting on Tuesday night at 8 p.m.
8 p.m.
with the Vocal Arts Studios.
Now, is Liz on that one?
We actually have Liz Tripodi in the studio and Ash.
And Ash. Beautiful. So listening to that, that's a new show starting up. And then we have Pino on Wednesday nights. Go on.
Sorry? Oh, okay, sorry. And on Wednesday night.
Come on, I'm getting you to do the John Blackman thing, mate.
Where's Dickie Nee? Where's Dickie Nee when I need him?
Dickie Nee.
Dickie Nee?
Yeah.
There he is. And on Wednesday nights, we actually got Can Do Radio at 7 p.m. And then your all-star world music with Guitar Talk with special guest Rob Little.
Rob Little, absolutely. So now, Jeremy, thank you very much for coming tonight.
Thank you, Pino.
You're welcome.
It's been an awesome night. And I mean, I know there's been a lot of, theories about, Jeremy Alsop, I think he played with, but tonight they were they all came out. All the stuff came out tonight.
And we also want to thank Eastgate Music for
Eastgate Music, absolutely, for the beautiful amp that we now have in the studio.
That's going to stay here. Well, Marchie doesn't know where I live, so it's a good thing.
So, but everybody for listening in, thank you very much. And until next week, we'll see you then. Bye for now.
Okay.
Everybody's always